So, I'm going to start with a little introduction, and then I'll ask a couple questions and just let you talk. Okay, today is August 24th, 2018. We're at Westminster Village in Bloomington, Illinois. We're going to be interviewing Mr. Vernon Pohlman, professor, and my name is Christine Gruber, volunteer interviewer. So, Vernon, tell us, where were you born?
St. Louis, Missouri.
You were. What's your date of birth?
May 21, 1920.
1920. And what were your parents, what were their occupations in St. Louis?
My father was a concrete contractor.
Oh.
My mother was a housewife.
Okay. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a sister who deceased about 5 years ago.
Okay. Were you the oldest or youngest?
I was the youngest.
Okay. So what were you doing before World War II started? Were you in college?
I was in college.
Okay. Where did you go to college?
Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay. And what was your area of study?
Economics and mathematics.
Okay. So December 7th, 1941 came, and were you, like a lot of people, did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, okay. And were you drafted into the service, or did you join?
I was drafted September 42.
42, okay. And which branch of the service did you serve?
In the Army Air Corps.
Okay. So where did you take your basic training?
I had no basic training.
You had, how was that possible?
When I was at the University of Chicago, I met a friend who said, go to that building across the campus. I went over there, I told him who I was, that I had this background with physics and mathematics and economics, and they said, you are one of our cadets.
Okay.
In other words, in training for meteorology.
Okay.
And it was approximately a 9-month course, but the next class would not start for 2 months. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, I was drafted in St. Louis, Jefferson Barracks, where I was put on hold for 2 months. And then during that 2 months, I was enlisting other draftees, doing the paperwork.
Okay. So, what was your first assignment? And you went into the service, and what was your rank?
Eventually, a captain.
A captain, okay. So when you first enlisted, did you go in as a lieutenant?
No, went in as a cadet.
As a cadet, okay. Okay, I hadn't heard about that program before.
Cadet in meteorology.
Okay. So what was your first assignment?
To forecast weather in Lubbock, Texas. The air base, there were pilots were being trained. The big job was to forecast when the fog would come in. We sent these pilots out, you know, on training missions, and sometime in the evening, invariably, there would be fog.
Oh.
And we had to get them back in time.
Sure.
So we had to forecast, that was a major thing. Of course, we forecast weather, rain, and so on, but the big job was for forecasting when the fog would.
Okay. So without the modern equipment we have today, it made it they were landing by sight?
By sight,
okay.
Yes, sure.
And by the seat of their pants?
All right.
Okay. How long were you in that assignment?
About 2 months.
Okay. Then what happened?
One day I got a notice to go over to South Plains, Texas, a nearby air base,
okay,
where we were training glider pilots. And I did the same job of forecasting the weather over there for about another month.
Okay.
And then one day I got a notice to report to Presque Isle, Maine.
Oh.
In 4 days. When we got to Presque Isle, Maine, it was 14 degrees below zero.
What time of the year was it? Was it?
It was February.
Oh dear, okay.
So in other words, started out in winter clothes at the University of Chicago, changed to summer clothes in Texas, and then had to go back to winter clothes in Prescott, Maine. There were 5 of us, similar situation. We're told to get there, you know, at a certain time. We got there and the commanding officer said, well, we don't really need you right now. So we sat there for 2 weeks. And then we got orders to report to Miami, Florida.
Oh my.
From winter to summer again.
Back to summer.
And we were there for about a month, waiting to be transported overseas.
Oh.
And we were transported through South America and then across from South America to the middle of Africa. We flew across the middle of Africa.
Now, how did you get from, did you go by boat across the Atlantic?
Everything was by air.
Okay.
This was the Air Corps.
So,
everything.
Everything by air. Good for you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then where did you land when you got into Africa?
Oh, golly, I can't remember. It was the far west tip of Africa.
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, they had the far east tip of Brazil and the far west tip of Africa.
Right.
The shortest distance across the Atlantic.
Okay.
And then through the land, clear across the middle of Africa.
Okay.
Until we got to the Far East, where eventually we landed at India. And when we arrived there, it was sort of reception for incoming troops of all kinds. So we were then put on another plane to go across Africa to be eventually assigned to specific bases.
Okay.
We came to the first base and they said, well, we don't need any meteorologists today. Okay, so we flew on to the next base. They didn't need any meteorologists. So one of the fellows said, look, can I be an assistant mess officer here? Oh yes, we could use an assistant mess officer. And then next base, we don't need another meteorologist. So he became an assistant recreation officer.
Oh.
I was a slow learner. I flew clear across India as far as you could go to the east, what they call the Assam Valley.
Okay.
Which was known as the CBI, China, Burma, India area. And there again, landed, did not need a meteorologist, and I saw a sign on the door, Statistical Control Office. I said, well, I've had a lot of statistics. I went in and said, do you need an assistant? And the lieutenant said, absolutely.
Very good.
So that became my primary base for the next, 2 years?
And that was in India?
In India, yes.
In India, okay.
The far east of India.
Okay. What were the conditions like at that base? Did you have a place to stay, a decent barracks?
We got a tent where 4 of us shared a tent. Okay. And we developed some, we made ourselves a screen door and so on, we improvised, keep out the mosquitoes. Eventually, about 6 months later, we were moved to a barracks. Okay. Where I was for the rest of the time in India. Okay. I mean, in Jorhat, India.
And you were there for what, you said 2 years?
Approximately.
Approximately, okay.
I mean, let's see.
What kind of assignments did you work on in the statistics area?
So my job was to coordinate all the statistics in the base. Make sure that everything was consistent, so that if one officer was reporting a number of tons of this that came in. Another officer reporting how many tons of this that he got, how many barrels of oil, how many barrels went in, how many went out, what was its condition, how many actually arrived at the destination in China. And the job there at Jorhat was to fly supplies, primarily gasoline, to the Chinese Air Force.
Oh.
And it was considered, vital for maintaining the Chinese Air Force. My job, of course, was to make sure that we were getting accurate statistics, so our commanding officer knew exactly what was going on, what was accomplishing. And having been trained in statistics, I drew some beautiful graphs. He became impressed with what I did. So he, within a year, he promoted me to first lieutenant.
Great. Very good.
And which was great.
So that takes you up to what, to 1943, 44?
Let's see, it'd be 1944, yes.
Okay. So where did you go next?
I was there until the end of the war. And during that time, the Japanese Army was moving up through Burma. And their objective was to take our base to end this transport of gasoline to the Chinese Air Force. In other words, we were the target. And they came within almost, you might say, striking distance of our base. I don't know how many miles, but somebody said it was 10 miles, whatever. But they kept moving up, and eventually the Japanese Army was stopped. Fortunately, because in the meantime, our base became so vital that the commanding officer assigned me, with no basic training, to take command of a cadre of clerks and cooks to defend the base at all costs. That's one outpost. I mean, there were other outposts. And we were fortunate that the Japanese Army did not actually reach us. But we were definitely in the combat zone. And my record shows being in combat zone.
Very good. Okay. So where were you, was this where you were located when the war ended?
No.
No.
Well, yeah, when the war ended. I'm sorry, sure, when the war ended. And then my commanding officer was moved to Calcutta. So he got me moved. He had me transferred with him to Calcutta, where he assigned me to take care of the transfer of troops back to the States. In other words, make sure that we did it evenly, that we did not send all the cooks from one base and all the mechanics from another base. In other words, working out the transfer of troops back. Where I did that, I think, for about 5 months. When I got my own orders to come back to the States.
Very good. So you came back to the States
in January of 46.
46, okay. Did you come back to St. Louis?
I came back, well, we of course flew to New York. I got a train to Chicago where I met my girlfriend. Fiance, in fact. And then went on to St. Louis, where we made arrangements. We got married within 2 weeks of my return. In the meantime, I went to the St. Louis school system central office to apply for a teaching job. Of course, it was middle of the year, and no, we don't need any teachers now. As I was walking out of the office, the central office, Mr. Bakerman said, "Would you be interested in teaching veterans?" I said, "Oh, sure." So I did that for several months, and the program expanded rapidly. The gentleman who was the veterans counselor there asked me to be his assistant, which I did for I guess 9 or 10 months approximately. And as the number of veterans reached a peak, that were wanting the high school diploma, I was then transferred into the technical high school where we were doing the veterans program and taught mathematics there.
Okay. How long did you do that?
Probably about a year.
Okay. Okay, and this was down in St. Louis area?
In St. Louis.
Okay.
The St. Louis Technical High School, yes.
Okay, great, great.
No, yes. And the assignment was quite good. I mean, enjoyable. I mean, these were students who are really interested in being educated. It was technical, but there was no horseplay among them. They're all excellent students. And meantime, one day while I was in class, teaching my class, an assistant principal came in and said, "You are to report to the main office tomorrow morning."
Uh-oh.
And they said the substitute in to finish teaching my class. The story was that they were confronted with a large number of women now getting married and having children. So how many of them are going to want maternity leave? What's going to be the impact on our budget? So they needed a statistician.
Aha.
And the gentleman who was there happened to know me, knew me because he had been the teacher of my sister when she was in training there for stenography, and she did his stenographic work. So there was a connection. So that's how he knew me and had me sent to the main office.
Okay.
Where I served, actually 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
I was known as assistant director of education, assistant director of education.
Okay.
And did a lot of statistical work. Eventually did the budget for the St. Louis school system, did other statistical problems, and so on. And in the summer of 1955, I finally finished my doctorate degree at Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay. Now, did you use any benefits, any VA benefits?
I did use, yes.
Very good.
I had no, I paid nothing. In other words, in fact, virtually all of my education was free. I had a scholarship originally to college. I had the GI Bill for all the time after my, in fact, I had a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago, and of course then the cadet training and so on.
So what brought you to Bloomington, Illinois?
There was another fellow and I were good friends getting our doctorates in St. Louis. And he had taken a job at Illinois State University. But then about a couple weeks after he agreed to that position, he got an offer to go to a more prestigious university in the East. I forget where, but anyway, he couldn't pass that up. But here he had committed himself to the job at Illinois State University. He came up to me and said, "Would you consider taking that job?" I said, "Well, they may not want me." But anyway, they interviewed me and decided to take me, to bring me here. In the meantime, I was scheduled to become an assistant principal in one of the high schools. In other words, the superintendent said, "You're doing a good job here in the main office, But before you to advance, you've got to get field experience. You've got to work in the actual schools. So it's a question of whether or not I wanted to be assistant principal and doling out discipline, which would have been the job there, or to come and be a faculty member here at ISU.
Okay. Okay. So you got married right after you got home.
Within 2 weeks.
Within 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
So
we were married 9 years at that point.
Okay.
And I had accumulated 9 years of toward my retirement,
Okay.
which I had to pass up because it took 10 years to be vested.
Oh.
However, they of course refunded all the money I put in.
Okay.
But I eventually was able to buy back part of that when the state of Illinois had a special program for going back and getting old pensions and adding them to one's pension locally in Illinois.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned your sister. Did she work for the war effort?
No.
No?
She worked for St. Louis Wholesale Drug
Okay.
as a contometer operator.
Okay.
She did work there, I think, I don't know how long, many years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're in Bloomington Normal now, and how long did you teach at the university?
35 years.
35 years. Okay. And
I'm sorry.
nope.
30 years.
30 years. Okay.
I think of 35 when I think of 85 when, from 55 to 85, it was 30 years.
Okay. Now, from your war experience, did you stay in touch with any of the people that you trained with or worked with?
A couple. I do recall going to a St. Louis baseball game with a major whom I had known in Calcutta. But aside from that, I had virtually no contact.
Okay. Okay. So what, from your experience serving, did you come away with any life lessons, or did it impact your life in the military, being in the military?
It did impact my life, of course. But I mean, feeling patriotic, and I had a deep concern about the welfare of our country eventually. Became very much involved in politics. And eventually, of course, teaching I thought was being a service. I involved myself in many local studies. For example, study on aging in Bloomington Normal, study on health care in Bloomington Normal, and so on. In fact, my tendency was to get my classes involved in something outside the classroom. I had my students go out and interview people about aging, and we had significant study which ended up in my being sent to Washington for the National Conference on Education, on aging, and the study on health care. One of the local doctors in Bloomington, Dr. Livingston, I believe, was impressed with our study, and he had me present our findings to the American Medical Association in Washington.
Okay, very good. Did you belong or have any affiliation with any of the veterans organizations?
Yes.
Oh.
Not then, but later on.
Okay.
American Legion and Normal.
Okay, very good. Is there anything you would like to talk about that we haven't touched on yet? Anything from your military experience or afterwards? I know you didn't really see combat. Now, when your base was under siege and you had a group of people under you, had you ever fired a weapon?
No, but we were prepared.
Okay.
In fact, the men under me realized that I was not a combat person, had no experience, but they had, and they said, don't worry, you're in command, but we're right behind you.
And they knew what to do.
They knew what to do.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
sure.
Great. How big was that base that you were stationed at?
Oh,
It must have been pretty large.
it was large. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We were. I guess I have no idea, but they were flying continuously, one plane almost after another to China.
Okay.
So you mean the ground troops, keeping their engines running and moving the drums of oil and so on. It was a sizable operation. I can't remember details. Of course, I had all the statistics back then, but I've forgotten that.
But they're in an archive someplace, I bet.
I bet.
I bet they are. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered today?
Well, it's irrelevant, I guess.
No, it's not.
The one thing that I consider the most important aspect of my life, as a graduate student at Washington University, our professor was asked by a social service agency in St. Louis to study the cost of segregated education. Another graduate student named Kathy McKinney, not related to our friend here.
Okay.
And we did considerable field work, research, went to various school districts, interviewed them about how much they could save if they did not have to have separate schools. We did a thorough analysis for the state of Missouri. Our professor wrote up the results in a national journal. Now, I've never double-checked this, but somebody said that the attorneys for the Brown versus Board of Education case presented our material to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, of course, declared segregated education unconstitutional. So I feel that's the most important thing I did in my life.
You were a part of that.
More important than actually my military service.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about or mention?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Professor Pohlman, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences with
Well, I
us.
appreciate you taking the time yourself
Yeah,
to do this.
it's been really nice. Yeah, I had no idea you had such an interesting military career.
Oh,
Without even going through basic.
Right.
I'm going, you're the first one I've ever heard that, who went all that way through the military with no basic training.
I can't believe that they didn't send me to basic before, but they did not want to miss my next class. In other words,
Yes, that was-
they wanted me on under their control.
So did you ever work as a meteorologist
Well, in Texas,
in Texas and
yes,
but never over in India or
not in India.
Africa?
No.
Okay. That would have been interesting because there were, what, 4 or 5 of you that flew over?
5 of us that flew over. Yes.
I wonder if any of you served as a meteorologist.
I don't think any of us did.
Okay. That's funny.
No.
That's good.
Which is hard to believe. But
Kind of like the military, though.
yes.
Sometimes and people joke about, yeah, well, I was studying to be a med student, now I'm a barber, so.
Yeah. Well, of course, in the meantime, there obviously could have been a meteorologist who was transferred or something, and a certain base needed a meteorologist. And I think we were there pretty much as replacements.
Yeah.
And actually turned out that they did not need replacements at that particular time.
Oh, okay. Now at the base of where you served the longest, how was you eventually got into wooden barracks?
Yeah.
And how was the food?
Great.
Was it a more American food? Did you have some local influence?
Mostly American food.
Okay,
Yeah.
well good.
Right.
That's great.
I should say, when I was at Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, I was amazed at how I was fed. My parents fed me well, but you know, the variety and the enormity and so on, it was something.
That's good. That's great. Well, anyway, thank you so much, Professor.
Well, thank you for taking your time.
Again. I'll take this down and we'll see. We stop recording.